everybody, welcome to another video. This is Ren from Grunge Granny, and on this video I wanted to show you my first attempt at marbling polymer clay, and then when I was done with that, I went ahead and got even more into tiny details and made some leaves on bookmarks. You'll see what I'm talking about. So if you're into watching processes and discussing some ADHD, hyperfixation, coping with that hyperfixation, and seeing some pretty things being made out of polymer clay, then please subscribe, turn on notifications, and like this video. Thank you. Let's get into it. First off, let me catch you up with this polymer clay. I have white, light blue, translucent, and translucent white. I cut it all into little cubes, and then I wrapped it in parchment paper to sit in the freezer. At the time, I wasn't particularly fond of the softness, and I wanted it to feel a bit sturdier. I was also paranoid that it wasn't going to hold its shape, and that it was just going to mix into a weird light blue gooey color instead. So I decided to try this out because I have a lot of endeavors, and every now and then I feel like a particular medium is calling out to me, or at least that's how I put it, where I can't stop thinking of a specific medium over and over until I finally decide to wrap up whatever I'm doing and move on to it. I mostly knew that I wanted to try this out. When I went to the craft store, I found this light blue, and I was in love with it. I have phases with colors, and I think this light blue and I are still in an affair. I did watch several videos on how to do this, but whenever I am in a task, I rarely will stop to research. So at this point, I was working off of memory and trial and error, and there was plenty of error. I did mix everything correctly, but you'll see where I kind of start to veer off, not knowing how to roll it out into that marbled look, but then you'll see when I finally get it. But doing this resulted in a full day being dedicated to it, which eventually led to the whole cereal and milk debacle, where I had leftover clay, so then I needed to make something else and add clay, but then from that there was more leftover clay, so then I would add something to it. Oh, and right there is where I'm mixing Perlex powder and some gold leaf. So this whole cereal milk thing kind of turned into a state of hyper-fixation. I don't know if you know what that is, unless you have ADHD, but honestly it can be a coping mechanism for any kind of neurodivergence, but it's a characteristic of ADHD, at least people have usually heard of it, mostly from that. Oh, the thing I squirted over all of that was translucent liquid Sculpey. So sometimes if I'm just depressed or anxious, I'll hyperfixate, but I also have CPTSD, so it ends up being a way for me to cope and feel in control, or at least that's how I'm analyzing myself, and that's kind of what I deduced for me. But it's more than just getting into a new hobby or a thing or an interest, because you lose time and nothing else can effectively pull you away, which is a bummer when you're also working on being present and in the moment, but you're in the bathroom thinking about what you're going to add to some polymer clay, and not drinking water because you don't want to go to the bathroom to stop, and not showering because you don't want to stop, and staying up too late. And that's what happened to me during the week of polymer clay. And part of how I stay on top of my self-care and mental health is via my bullet journal. So when I could see that I wasn't getting the right amount of sleep or water in my system, and slacking on my just 2 minutes of daily habits, and wasn't even filling in my 5-minute journal prompts, like the whole day was just missing, then I knew come day 3, when I was starting to feel even more anxious and insecure and kind of depressed, it's like, oh yeah, this is my mental health, it is starting to spiral. Here is where I made a cane and I cut it, and I realized that, like, oh yeah, I need to be cutting the cane and then putting all those little cutouts together and then rolling it out. And so I put it into my resin bookmark mold because I'm trying to not do resin anymore. And it worked pretty well in the end. But also, this is not the way to put clay into a mold. This ended up going terribly, so I cut it all back up and recut out the cane and re-roll it out again because it was just not going in the mold very well. Anyway, so once I started to see that my mental health was spiraling, I needed to set some goals for myself, and the first was just to finish the marbled clay, and then move on to the copper and turquoise combos, and then some moon cycle ones, and then finally some springish ones. You'll get to see the finished marbled clay pretty soon. It looked so good when it was done. There it is! So once I had those in mind, I really needed to figure out a stopping point and how to get there. I was struggling with how to get myself from point A, which was currently hyperfixating, to B, which was a loose idea of everything I needed to get done, to C, which was being done. So point A and C were actually the locations, with point B being the path. So on day 5 of Polymer Clay Week, I did decide to just put away the clay. I just put it all away because I have such a small space that once I put it away, it would be too harrowing to bring it all back out again. That way I would be onto the sanding, polishing, and varnishing steps. But then I started hyper-fixating with sanding. Then, thankfully, because the universe, God, or luck, or whatever you believe, has graced me with the most amazing community of people, my neighbor intervened. My neighbor, Jade, asked if Jade could talk to me about something, and I said, sure. And Jade said, I don't want this to sound like I'm upset with you, and I'm not trying to make you feel bad, but I want to tell you some things that I've noticed. And I said, okay. And Jade said, it seems like you've been neglecting your self-care and taking care of yourself lately. I said, I know. Okay, well, I thought you probably knew, but I wasn't sure why. And we talked about it and eventually got around to it just being because of the polymer clay. So then Jade said, well, what do you need to do to finish the polymer clay? I said, I still need to sand everything, which is 15 bookmarks, and then polish and varnish all of them. Okay, and how long do you think that will take? Well, it took me 3 hours to sand 4, so let's say about 8 hours for sanding. I sand by hand and I have very limited space. I had just watched Struthless's video on time management, and he says to go ahead and allot double the amount of time that you think a thing will take so that you can go ahead and just prepare for that happening. And so I had said, okay, 16 hours. Then Jade ordered me food and told me, okay, Jade was going to follow up with me in 16 hours to make sure I had finished everything and that after that I had to be done. I had to be done. So I went in and got started. The first thing I noticed was that I had been hyper-fixating on sanding and that it didn't actually need to take me that long. Sanding out every single detail just wasn't necessary for all of them, and some of the bumps and little marks and unevenness gave them kind of more character, so that was done in 3 hours. Then I tried to polish them and then learned I don't actually have a Dremel, and the thing that I have isn't meant to be used like a Dremel, so I scrapped polishing and went straight to varnishing. And it ended up being done in less than 6 hours, so this taught me several things. The first was that, yes, it is good to pay attention to details, but as much as I love spending time with things and feeling meditative and mindful in them, I cannot be losing time to the point of my own self-harm. Because at this point, it's not mindfulness, and it becomes escapism. And I can't spiritually bypass that reality, calling my hyperfixation a meditation that's transporting me elsewhere while creating problems for myself and neglecting myself. Second was that if I'm under a time crunch, I have to make more decisions on whether or not I see something as a true priority. Having a deadline showed me that not everything is as important as everything else, and that sometimes things are done in a way that is complete and makes me happy, and that I was probably just creating problems in my head to give myself more work. Third is that all of this is bred out of a need to feel pressured, exhausted, overloaded with my work, because that's how I've always felt, and when it isn't externally imposed, I end up just doing it to myself. So with that, I've been time blocking, allotting double the amount of time that I think a task will take so that I have plenty of time, scheduling in my meals, and working on not letting myself get dehydrated by tracking it all, and just ultimately making the priority my time management. And I thought that that would mean doing everything in the time allotted, but nah, it just means doing what I can in the time allotted to move on to the next task in a healthy way so that I stay healthy and I don't end up tearing myself up. I hope that helps somebody. Thank you for watching. Bye.